Whether you like it or not, our lives revolve around work. Whether you're working or you've got a business, you're trading a literal giant chunk of your life in exchange for money. And then we use that money to buy food and live. Which is why you have to view every cent the government takes from you in taxes as them literally murdering a portion of you. A 1% tax in exchange for some safety, running water, roads, and firefighters, that's a worthwhile trade. A 4% tax? Still a decent trade. But taking 25% of my paycheck? That means the government is literally taking away 19 years of your life. But at a 50% tax rate, the average American lives to 77. That means at 50%, they're robbing you of nearly 4 decades of your life. But Jake, I'm not rich. I'm not getting taxed 25%, 50%. I only make $37,000 a year. I only pay like 7% federal income tax and a little bit more for state income tax. Well, I hate to break it to you, but when you add in all the other ways the government gets their grubby little hands on your money, sales tax, property tax, estate tax, capital gains tax, payroll tax, when you account for all of those, the median person in America is already paying around 23% in taxes. That's 17 years of your life spent literally slaving away for the government. If you work 8 hours a day at McDonald's or at an office or whatever, every day you spend 2 of those hours working for no money. And if you manage to move up in life and make more money, well, they're just gonna punish you more for doing better. If you manage to start making $200,000 to $300,000 a year, well, they're gonna rob you of 20 to 30 years of your life. If you manage to start making $300,000 to $500,000 a year in a high tax state, well, they're gonna steal around 34 years of your life. And if you get to $500,000 or $1 million a year, well, then the government is murdering half of you. 50% of your lifeblood, of your efforts, of the good you could have done with that money is poof, gone. Now, it would be one thing if the US government was like the Swiss government, where the Swiss do get taxed a lot, like 25 to 35% from the median person, but you know their society actually looks like the closest thing to a utopia I've ever seen, where almost everything is pristine and safe. If our taxes were being spent like that, I could potentially be down for that. But the US is just not like that, is it? Here, the average American gets taxed almost the same amount, 23%. And for what? Running out of water to put out the fires in California? Tents for the homeless that cost $30,000 a year? Not helping the victims of the hurricanes, of the toxic railroad disaster? So we can keep sending more money to Ukraine and Israel, while they scare us with fake UFO sightings with money that we gave them? While 107,000 people die a year from fentanyl, which is the equivalent of 35 9/11s? Really? That's what we're paying for? Because we're definitely not paying for good roads, safe streets, and well-funded firefighters like people say taxes are for. No, you're paying $25,000 for a drag show seminar for Venezuelan migrants in Ecuador. You're paying $2.3 million to study whether cats prefer Zoom calls over FaceTime. Or $6.9 million for studying smart toilets that recognize your anal print. Or $1.8 million for a study on the psychological effects of losing at rock, paper, scissors. And many, 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 many more absurd examples that are now coming out. Now, what if I told you that we could achieve a Switzerland-esque utopia in America, or at least get close to it without even needing an income tax? What if we're already collecting way more than enough tax dollars to afford the best roads, to afford the safest streets, well-funded firefighters? What if we're already collecting enough to keep having the strongest military in the world, to maybe even get close to Switzerland levels of quality of life, or at least maintain our current quality of life, while not having to rob the average Joe of 17 years of his life? What if we're already collecting enough taxes to do all of this, but instead we're spending that money on injecting puppies with cocaine in a $2.5 million study? The single greatest threat to our freedom is not China, it's not war in Europe, it's not whatever other fear-mongering they're promoting on the news this week. No, the single greatest threat to our freedom is the taxman. Because the taxman with the point of his gun determines how many of your years are spent in servitude to the suits in Washington. And right now, it's many years. But it's not just the spineless bureaucrats and politicians that are to blame here. Think about it, all these insane spending examples that we just went over, all those billions, all those trillions had to go to someone's pockets. What is being exposed right now could be the biggest collective fraud in human history. Every dollar wasted is a dollar that could have gone to making your life safer and better, that could have gone to making the lives of the less fortunate safer and better. And we're gonna expose it all in this documentary. But to do that, we're gonna have to go all the way back to when this fraud first took form. Stay dangerous and let's get into it. American Revolution was a war fought over taxes, but not just any taxes. Taxes that averaged out to around only 1 to 2%. And these 1 to 2% taxes by the British were not on your income or payroll. No, these were just taxes on super small things like tea and legal documents. And yet, these early Americans were willing to lay down their lives, all to free themselves from 1 to 2% in taxes. Oh, how we strayed far from the path. And once the revolution was won, and America finally became independent, guess what? The new government was just as quick to start charging people taxes. Without taxes, how would they build hospitals or schools? How would they defend America from the British in the future? Yeah, we've been using the same arguments for taxes for over 240 years now. But here's the thing. Back in freshly independent America, taxes were very different. There were no income taxes. Instead, they had tariffs, taxes on imported goods, and they also had excise taxes, taxes on non-essential products like alcohol and tobacco. It was simple, straightforward. There was no one deducting money from your salary before you even see it. No IRS breathing down your neck. But then came 1861, and suddenly everything changed. Civil War broke out in America, and suddenly people weren't buying imported tea or fancy fabrics anymore. And with tariffs and excise taxes going down the drain, the government was in serious trouble. And to make matters worse, fighting a massive-scale war turned out to be really expensive. It cost the government $5.2 billion, or more than $100 billion today. And if the government couldn't pay its bills to keep the soldiers fighting, it would lose. So in 1861, America rolled out its first ever income tax. If you earned more than $800 a year, you had to pay a 3% income tax to Uncle Sam. Just a year later, they dropped that minimum number to $600, and it worked. But here's where things get interesting, because according to the government, these new income taxes were only temporary. And as soon as the war ended and the economy recovered, this new income tax would disappear. And surprisingly, they actually kept their word. 10 years after it was created, the income tax was gone. But you know what that did? It made people comfortable with an income tax. They thought, oh, an income tax during wartime is a thing now, no big deal. And on top of that, like a drug addict, the government was hooked. For 10 years, the government was getting a cut of almost every single working-class American salary, and suddenly all of that dried up. Something had to be done. Think about it, as a politician, the easiest way to stay in power is to give people free stuff. The more free stuff you give them, the more likely they'll vote for you again. But to be able to give away free stuff, you need money, and that trusty old income tax gave that to you. So in 1894, Congress thought, well, everyone was fine with the income tax during the Civil War, maybe we can just reinstate a tiny little income tax now. Nothing major, just like 2% on anyone earning more than $4,000. I mean, they were okay with a lot more during the war, so what is 2% to them now? Boy, did they have a surprise waiting for them. See, back then, income taxes weren't actually a part of the Constitution. They were just an emergency measure that people accepted when there was a really good reason for it, like a civil war. But there was no war going on in 1894, so as soon as the government actually tried collecting on that 2% income tax, they ran into serious issues. In the end, even the Supreme Court ruled that the tax was unconstitutional, which left the government right back to where it started, with no income tax money to use for their spending. But the government wasn't just gonna sit back and accept it. They needed that money. So they went back to the drawing board. And that's when it hit them. If the only reason they couldn't collect income tax was because it was part of the Constitution, why not just change the Constitution itself? And that's exactly what they did. In 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified, allowing Congress to collect taxes on income. And you want to know what the best part was? Just 1 year after income taxes were made permanent, World War I broke out. And it was the perfect excuse as to why the government needed more money. So even though this new income tax wasn't just some emergency measure like it was during the Civil War, for the first few years it definitely felt like that. And even though income taxes were now permanent, people were too distracted by the war to care. They just assumed they were paying it to help America come out on top. And even better, with World War I in full swing, the government didn't have to stop at a 1%, 2%, or even 7% tax. No, they raised the top income tax rate to 15% within a few years. Because if we don't tax you, evil will win. So do your patriotic duty. It was a foolproof argument. And it worked so well that by 1917, the income tax went up to an insane 67%. But hey, at least you were funding justice and democracy, right? Pandora's box had just been opened. And as long as the public has some big dramatic event tied to their income tax, they wouldn't put up a fight against random tax increases. And conveniently, the next 60 years were full of chaos and conflict. The Great Depression, we need taxes to save the economy. Even better, we need taxes for Social Security, it's for your own good. By 1936, the top tax rate hit 79%. But why stop there? Just a few years after the Great Depression, there was World War II. And this time, the government got really proactive. They started raising taxes before America even joined the war, and they kept them as high as possible for as long as possible. Between 1940 and 1963, the top tax rate hit 91% a couple of times, while more and more people were being classified as eligible to pay taxes. But by then, income taxes were so widespread, no one even batted an eye when the government took it one step further, with arguably the worst tax in history, payroll taxes. With payroll taxes, now your boss wasn't just the guy paying you, but he was also the government's most trusted little tax collector too. Before you even touched your money, your boss would be forced by law to take out your payroll taxes first, and then hand you the rest afterwards. This gives you no chance to even try to save on taxes. But that wasn't the worst part, because the only reason why anyone would accept a tax rate of 91%, the only reason why people would accept payroll taxes in the first place, was because they assumed it would be temporary. Well, it's been 80 years. And apparently, America still hasn't recovered enough from World War II because these taxes are still around. See, the government had cracked the code. Keep finding new excuses to tax people, and income tax would never have to go away again. First it was the Korean War, Cold War, Vietnam, and by the time the war on terror finally rolled around, no one even remembered a time when income taxes weren't a thing anymore. It had become the norm. And fast forward to today, and taxes and spending have gone so out of hand that if all we did was just clean up spending, we wouldn't even need the income tax anymore. In 2023, the American government collected $4.5 trillion. Over half of that money, 54%, came from the individual income tax, 30% of it came from payroll tax, another 11% came from corporate income and excise tax, and just 1.8% came from tariffs. And how much did the government spend in that same period? $6.2 trillion. That's almost a $2 trillion gap. But according to politicians, it's never enough. We need more money to give away more free stuff. We gotta raise taxes even more. But is this really true? Did it really cost $6.2 trillion to run America in 2023? Do they really need that much money? Did they really need to get almost all of those tax dollars from your income and your payroll? Absolutely not. Ask anyone who's used a public service in the past year, and they'll tell you there's no way that $6.2 trillion went towards things that actually matter. So let's do the math. The government insists that raising income taxes is the only way to increase federal revenue, is the only way to increase how many tax dollars the government gets. But what about tariffs? See, back in the 1800s, tariffs, which are taxes on goods coming into America, made up almost 100% of the tax money the government collected. This basically means that if other countries want to make money off of our people, they would have to pay a fee for it. But by 2019, tariffs were close to 0% of how much money the government took in. Before Trump took office, the average tariff for America was around 2%, and in 2023, we imported $3.8 trillion worth of goods. That means at a 2% tariff, that's only around $80 billion in tariffs in total. But let's say all Trump did was increase tariffs to 25%. Well, boom, that's an extra $1 trillion in revenue right then and there. That's $1 trillion less than the government needs to get from you for your paycheck. But won't higher tariffs make everything more expensive? And yeah, at the start for a while, imported goods are gonna cost more, but you also be paying 0% income tax. So if you didn't want to pay for expensive imported goods for your extra cash, you could choose not to and simply save your money, instead of being forced to give up your money at gunpoint. This is why Trump has raised tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico. And that's only tariffs. What about actually reducing spending? How much money could the government really save by tightening its belts? I mean, it's not like they're just out there wasting money on literally nothing, are they? Well, they actually are. Except they call it improper payments. In 2023, the government lost over $236 billion to improper payments. That's billions of dollars that just disappeared into thin air because the government is incompetent. Fix that and now we're at $1.2 trillion in savings. But that's not where it ends. Every year we spend around $1.6 trillion on public health insurance. Well, as it turns out, around 25% of that ends up being wasted or lost along the way as well. That's another $400 billion in waste. So now we're at $1.6 trillion in savings. Then there's the Pentagon, which has a budget of $840 billion, and yet it's failed its 7th audit in a row. But don't worry about it, plus, because they're making progress. Quote, momentum is on our side, and throughout the department there is a strong commitment and belief in our ability to achieve an unmodified audit opinion, end quote. Ah yes, because that's what matters, that the Pentagon believes they'll eventually pass an audit. How much waste is Elon Musk and Doge gonna find at the Pentagon? Let's say we find $200 billion in waste. Well, now we're up to $1.8 trillion in savings, almost at our goal of solving the $2 trillion deficit. And that's just a start. Elon Musk recently posted that Doge has discovered that there are nearly $4.7 trillion in federal payments that are completely untraceable. How much of that is fraud? How much of that is useless spending that could be cut? Add on top of that all the wasteful spending Elon Musk has already found, all the useless federal employees that he's firing, and we're easily at that $2 trillion in savings or much more. And with those savings, we could easily lower income taxes for everyone. Will Trump lower income taxes to zero? He has hinted at it before, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it. And on top of that, even if he does lower income taxes, which he probably will, again, the genie is out of the bottle. And once he leaves office, they're definitely gonna keep raising taxes again and raise spending again. And that is why you can't rely on Trump or some other politician to save the day, because the only long-term solution is to take your fate into your own hands. And to do that, you gotta understand how the tax game works. Because make no mistake, it is a game. Because at the end of the day, The politicians may have been the ones that passed the tax laws, but those politicians have to answer to their donors, also known as the rich. See, there's a reason why Trump famously said that he's smart for not paying taxes.
Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes me smart.
It's because although the rich can't stop every tax on them from going into law, they do get to play a hand in how the tax code is written, and they make sure to include every single loophole possible for themselves.
She complains that Donald Trump took advantage of the tax code. Well, why didn't she change it? Why didn't you change it when you were a senator? The reason you didn't is that all your friends take the same advantage that I do, and I do. You have provisions in the tax code that frankly we could change, but you wouldn't change it because all of these people give you the money so you can take negative ads on Donald Trump.
Heck, just look at Trump's massive tax cuts back in 2017. Back in 2017, the top 1% of Americans got a juicy $60,000 cut from their taxes on average, while the middle class, they got a measly $500 in tax cuts. This is why although the rich do technically have the highest tax rates, the ones that always get hammered the most are the middle class. As you saw earlier, most of the money the government collects is from the income tax. And guess who gets hit hardest by the income tax? On the surface, it may seem like the rich get hit the hardest, since they have the highest income tax rates. But here is the reality: the rich usually don't make that much income. The rich are usually business owners and investors, not employees, which means they don't make most of their money from their salary. Elon Musk famously has a $0 salary from Tesla. Jack Dorsey has had a $0 salary for years. Mark Zuckerberg has a $1 salary, and Larry Page and Sergey Brin has also had a $1 salary for many years as they were running Google. Why? Because salaries are hit with the dreaded payroll tax, and then you also owe income tax on it as well. Not exactly conducive to building wealth. So instead of salaries, they get paid in stock options, dividends, their businesses grow in value, their investments generate cash for them, all of which is taxed at a much lower rate. And when you have businesses and assets, you can even borrow money against your business as a loan. And the great thing about this is you get the cash. Since it's your business, you get to determine the interest rate for it. And guess what? You don't have to pay any tax on this cash since it's a quote-unquote loan. This is what all of America's richest elite do to get billions in cash without paying any tax and without having to sell their stock in their companies. And this is why getting paid for your labor is a losing game, whether you're working at McDonald's or you're a highly paid professional like a doctor. Because not only is getting paid by your labor limited by you working, but it also guarantees that the tax man is going to bend you over and screw you. That's why, as you can see from this graph, the richer the person is, the less they make from wages. And make no mistake, the government knows this. They know income taxes and payroll taxes hurt the middle and lower class the most. But the reason why they do it is simple. Number one, business owners and investors are their donors, so they give them all the loopholes. And number two, business owners and investors are the ones that create the most economic growth. They're the ones that create jobs. So the government wants to incentivize them by giving them lower taxes. And that's all the tax code really is. It's a mass incentive system. The government needs economic growth. Economic growth comes mainly from business owners and investors, so they incentivize you to be a business owner or investor while they punish you more for being an employee. That's why if you actually want to lower your taxes no matter who you are and no matter who's in office, then the first step is to simply follow this fundamental incentive. You gotta stop being just an employee and you gotta start a business on the side. Because quite frankly, if you stay as an employee, there's just not much you can do to lower your taxes. You're kinda just screwed with how the tax code is set up, but if you start a business or investment, not only will that business or investment make you more money if you pick the right one, but you'll also end up paying less tax. But that is just step one. If you notice from this graph earlier, for the top 1%, 22% of their income comes from their businesses. And we just covered that with step one, starting a business on the side. But if you notice, the other big portion of their income comes from capital gains and dividends. This is money that they earn from investing in something like stocks and then selling it for a higher price, or it comes from investing in a stock that pays out a dividend. Now this is really critical because these things are taxed as capital gains tax, which is way lower than income tax at 0 to 20%. So this is why the rich invest so much, not only because of compound interest, but because the taxes are also much lower. But obviously, to be able to invest where it even makes a dent, you need a lot of cash. That's why the business you start has to have super high profit margins. Not only is having high profit margins good for many reasons, but most importantly, it gives you enough cash to not only enjoy life, but to have enough left over at the same time to be able to invest in traditional investments. So that is step 2 to lowering your taxes. You gotta pick a business that has super high profit margins so that you can start growing your income from investments. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that not only do employees have to pay payroll taxes, but if you hire a full-time employee in the US, you also have to pay taxes for their Social Security, Medicare, unemployment taxes, and so on. So that's why whatever business you start, it has to be one that doesn't have to rely on full-time employees in the US. You gotta be able to run it with only contractors that are either within or outside of the US to be able to avoid all these employee taxes. This will also just make your life easier and your business more profitable all across the board. So that's step 3, picking a business that doesn't require full-time US employees. And on top of that, by hiring contractors, not only do you avoid paying their taxes, but they also get to do tax write-offs just like you to lower their taxes, instead of just being forced to pay payroll taxes before they even get their paycheck. And the final thing you have to have if you want to lower your taxes is that the business you pick has to be location independent. This means it shouldn't be bound to a single location, and you should be able to do it from anywhere. Again, not only does this make your lifestyle easier, you don't have to be home all the time and can make money from anywhere, but by being location independent, if taxes get raised in your state or your country, you can pick up and leave if you want. And the perfect example of this is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a US territory that has become America's tax haven. That's because as a US citizen, you can move there for 6 months out of the year and only pay 4% income tax and 0% capital gains tax. I've been there, it's beautiful, and there's an entire population of US business owners that live there that I've met that only pay 4% tax and nothing else. It's incredible. But the only reason any of these business owners were able to move there in the first place is because their businesses can be run from anywhere. That is why it's so important for the business you start to be location independent. Because even if you don't want to move to Puerto Rico, maybe you want to move to another state that has lower taxes. Maybe later on you want to renounce your citizenship altogether to be able to move to a different country with no taxes. Being location independent gives you this peace of mind and freedom. So those are the 4 fundamental steps to lowering your taxes no matter who's in office. Number 1, you gotta follow the incentive of the tax code by starting a business on the side. Number 2, you gotta pick a business that has super high profit margins so you actually have cash left over to invest in income generating investments that are taxed at a lower rates. Number 3, you gotta pick a business that doesn't rely on full-time US employees. And number 4, the business you pick has to be location independent. Now this is why I love my business that I've been doing for the last 5+ years. It meets all the steps we just talked about, it's made me multiple millions of dollars, and it's called Faceless YouTube channels, just like the one you're watching right now, where you don't have to show your face, use your voice, or even make the videos yourself. And it works by these 3 simple steps that I've repeated on multiple channels. Step number 1 is you find a channel idea and register a new channel on YouTube. This will take 15 minutes to do. Step 2 is you find skilled freelancers on public work marketplaces like Upwork or Behance. These remote contractors will be the ones who produce the profitable videos for you for a small fee. And step 3 is you simply start posting these viral videos and allow YouTube to run ads to all the people who watch these videos. That way, at the end of every month, YouTube will direct deposit the money you made into your bank accounts. And if you would like to have a shortcut to these 3 steps so you can hop on this wave of online success and try it out yourself, then I'd like to invite you to my 5-day Faceless Income Fast Starts, where I'll show you how to duplicate my entire system that I've been using on all my YouTube channels step by step. During these 5 days, I'll show you how to get your Faceless channel up and running, how to automate the entire video creation process, and ultimately how to turn the videos you didn't even have to touch into profits. Now there's a link under this video, and if you click on it, it will take you to a short page where I explain this entire 5-day Fast Start in detail. On top of that, I want to make this Fast Start as accessible to everyone as possible, so that's why you're going to find it's really affordable. We're talking less than a dinner at a cheap restaurant. So scroll down and click the link below right now, and hopefully I'll see you on the inside of the Fast Starts.